Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this webinar today with Betta Lyon Del Soro with Amazon. My name is Rashida Clements, and I'm the Business Development Manager here at Women in Cybersecurity. Before we get started with today's talk, I'd like to give a brief overview of the WESIS organization. WESIS is a 501c3 nonprofit organization with a mission to recruit, retain, and advance women in cybersecurity. We often go by our acronym WESIS, as in We Sis, because that's exactly what we are, a global cyber sisterhood. Our community is made up of over 11,000 members in 107 countries. We have 69 professional affiliates and 356 student chapters around the world. We offer a range of initiatives and skills development programs for all career levels. All of our job openings from WESIS strategic partners are available on the job board year-round. We are currently accepting applications through tomorrow, May the 20th, for our AI Learning Series. To learn more about our programming efforts, please visit our website, wesis.org. We want to take a moment to thank all of our strategic partners who fund us year-round. Our Tier 1 partners are Akamai, Amazon, Bloomberg, Cisco, Ford Motor Company, Google, Lockheed Martin, Palo Alto Networks, and SentinelOne. Feel free to ask questions throughout today's webinar. Please type them in the box below and we will address them during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Lastly, if you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe to the WESIS newsletter to stay up to date on upcoming events and programs. You can find it at wesis.org in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And with that, I will turn it over to Betta.
Sounds good. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. I'm really excited today to be going over secure vibe coding on AWS. So I have some demos here. They are pre-recorded because I want to make sure everything goes well, but I'll be walking you through various things. So hope you're ready. So I hope you're here because maybe you know what vibe coding is. Maybe you've tried it out. Maybe you do it all the time. And everyone agrees kind of that vibe coding is fun. Using AI to write stuff, it's really easy, it's awesome. But security incidents aren't so fun. And unfortunately, sometimes if we get a little too into vibing, we may not be thinking about security. And I want to teach you how to take steps to vibe code more securely on AWS because I'm speaking as part of the AWS WeSys chapter. And we want to share with you some tips on how to be more secure. So I'm going to teach you how today. So a little roadmap here, some different things I'm going to talk about. I'll give you a little intro on who I am and how I got into all of this. Then we're going to start with some really easy vibe coding stuff and work up to a little more complicated. But just we're going to start out with Party Rock. We're going to build an IAM policy explainers, talk about some identity access management. We're going to talk about Bedrock Playground, which is on the AWS console, and Kiro, which is AWS's vibe coding IDE or integrated development environment. Do a little vibe coding, and then talk about some different things to consider when vibe coding, about making sure that you're checking your plugins and your code to be more secure, and then wrap up with some tips you can use going forward. So I hope you're ready. If you do have an AWS account, you can follow along with a lot of this stuff. So maybe get signed into there. And the first demo, Party Rock, doesn't need any kind of account. Anyone can sign up for that for free. So that one will be available for everyone to try. So first, I'll give you a little bit of intro here. I'm Betta, and I'm a penetration tester at Amazon Web Services. I'm currently located in Turin, Italy. So I'm originally from the United States, but I moved over to Turin last year, and I'm working for AWS, doing penetration tests, which is a form of ethical hacking. So making sure we're keeping AWS safe for everybody to use. My journey started all the way back when I was a teenager. I was 13. I started teaching myself to code. I was building websites, and I got into web hacking through high school and college, and then went on to my master's in cybersecurity from Georgia Tech. I've got a bunch of certifications. I've worked for some different penetration testing consultancies in the US and then now in Italy. I'm also a frequent conference speaker, so that's something I'm passionate about, is getting more women speaking at cybersecurity conferences. If you're ever interested in that, always feel free to reach out. Um, And I've been a mentor for 10 years for Technovation Challenge, which is one of my favorite international girls coding competitions. And I'm also a CFP mentor for WESIS, which is the calls for proposals to get more people to submit to the WESIS conference. And I'm active in many other groups for women in cyber. And I love these communities. I think it's really important. So happy to be sharing some knowledge with all of you today. And before we get into this, I'm coming with this, like assuming that most of you know at least a little bit about coding, cybersecurity, all that stuff. But I'll just kind of define some things here in case anybody in the audience isn't familiar with some of these terms. So, vibe coding to me means using AI to write applications with very little edits. So, it's not just like asking AI for some help about like an error code or something. It's like you go to your AI, type something in, and say, build me a website, build me an app that does this. Um, and then MCP servers, that is a way that you can give your agent like a tool to use. So you can give it different plugins, different things that it can like execute tools on its own. And I'll talk about that later. And then you also hear a lot of people talking about skills or plugins or extensions. These are all just kind of additional functionality you can add to your agent, any AI tools that you have. And then pen testing is what I do. So that's looking for vulnerabilities in any kind of platform, code, whatever. And kind of combining this is that, as a pen tester, I also look at stuff that has been vibe coded. And I also, do research on this stuff and I give several talks on it. So it's one of my areas of interest. So a little bit about AWS. Hopefully you know what AWS is, but it's one of the largest clouds in the world. We, have infrastructure all around the world, and it's Amazon's cloud computing program, and it basically provides tools so that you can build stuff in the cloud without having to manage a server. And especially in terms of AI and vibe coding, that means that you are setting up agents and systems, and you don't necessarily need to manage all the underlying stuff yourself. And I think that's really handy. And when we talk about security in the cloud, hopefully some of you have heard this as well before, but the shared responsibility model, I'll just touch on it briefly. But if you haven't heard this, this is really important. It's kind of the foundation of cloud security. But basically, as AWS, we are responsible for security of the cloud. And as customers, you are responsible for security in the cloud. So it means as AWS, pen testers like me are always looking at our services to make sure that we're making everything secure as we possibly can. And we're trying to test things and find any edge cases. And so when we give you something to use, we're saying this is, as secure as we could make it. But then you, when you set up your stuff in the cloud, you also have to make sure that you're following best practices because we, want to give you privacy into the things that you're building. We're not there like checking your code to make sure that it's secure unless you sign up for some kind of specific service. So the code that you write on like a Lambda or an EC2, that's yours and you have to make sure that's secure. Um, Different things like that. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of mostly the customer side here because this the things that you can actually take action on. And I want to talk about secure vibe coding. So at AWS, like that's a lot of the stuff that I'm working with right now is pen testing different things related to AI. AI's and everything now. And so when we give you a service, we're saying like this is as secure as we make it. But what you build with that is still up to you. And so I want you to be sure that you're building things securely. So hopefully I'll give you some tips to build things more securely. So the very first demo I'm going to do is something super easy, and hopefully you can follow along with this. This is, just a really quick little intro into kind of vibe coding in its like easiest form, where you don't need to know any kind of code. Um, if you've never heard of Amazon Party Rock, it's a really awesome little tool. You can just search right here, partyrock.aws. You can sign up for free. You can use like any kind of account. You don't need to have like an AWS account already. So definitely go sign up there. And this was released a while back as kind of a free trial for Bedrock, which is like our major AWS AI service. And it's kind of a way to like play around with types of stuff that Bedrock does without having to like pay and sign up for it. But it's also just been really fun for like doing educational workshops and that kind of thing. It's got kind of a life of its own as like a fun way to play around with AI stuff. So I'm going to show you kind of what it looks like to like vibe an app, or like how do you make like a web app for just vibing it, just giving it prompts. And so what we're going to use this for is to do an IAM policy explainer. So IAM is identity access management. And that's another big thing of cloud security. Also, if you haven't heard of this before, definitely go take some time to look it up. It's like really important in terms of the customer side of security. Basically, when you have an account, you can give access to other people. Maybe you have a whole team, but you want to make sure that you're using the principle of least privilege. So you're only giving access to people that need it. You're not giving access to everyone. You're not opening your stuff up to the whole world. So it's up to you, like who you want to give access to, but you use these things called IAM policies to lock that down. But they can be a little bit confusing if you've never done them before. So I'm going to use Party Rock as an example to explain to you kind of both how vibe coding works and how IAM policies work, um, and give like a little example of how that looks. So if you if you sign into Party Rock, you'll get some kind of dashboard like this. It's super pretty. I love the colors. Um, Definitely what's more fun than about Party Rock is more fun than the AWS console, which is a little more serious. But we have some lovely things here. So we're going to do the build AI powered app. So if you click on that, I have like a little demo here recorded of me walking through this, and I'll just kind of narrate some things and point out some different things here. So you can create an app, and what it does is it pulls this up, and you can just type in a prompt something. I want to build like a web app that does this. So I'm going to build an IAM policy explainer, and I want it to help me explain some policies here that I would use for securing vibe coding. So you just type in a little prompt in the cloud with AWS, and press enter, and it starts thinking, and it will start building you something here, and you can watch how it goes. So it'll kind of give you its thoughts. It does little things like this, and I'll skip forward here a little bit. But it's gonna like create like an overlay of what it thinks you want. It's like, okay, I could paste in IAM policy and it would explain it to me. And it could like give me some information, but this wasn't exactly what I was thinking. So I can go back here and I can define and be like, okay, I actually wanted you to generate me some IAM policies because I want to like show them for this demo for my talk. And I don't want to have to like go find one and paste in it. So have a drop down of some different ones. So you can give it more instructions, da 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 da, and then suggest them. And it thinks it's like, okay, I can get more specific there. It's going to think, and that's one of the main things about vibe coding is you can tell an agent to do something and to build you something, but it may not get it right on the first try. So the best that you can do is to provide more specifications. That's called spec-driven development, and you want to give it exactly what you want because it can only give the best guess, right? So the more information you can give it about what you exactly want it to look like, you'll get a better result. So now look at this. It updated, it tells me the things that it changed. This is really cool. Now I can go and pick like, actually, I want to talk about like, what if we were vibe coding with, I think, let's do, I have these different things. SageMaker notebooks is one thing I could choose. And then I want to like add something here. Like, what if I'm using this product with multiple users? What kind of IAM policies would I need to make this more secure? And then what you do is you press the play app button up here, and it will like play the like workflow that you've put together. So I go up here and click play, and then it loads, and it will start generating me, whatever workflow I built. Um, for this one, it's going to build me some IAM policies, and I'll kind of explain what these are. So just at this point in the demo, I've kind of shown you what Party Rock is, and this is like vibe coding. So basically, I hope you can already think of some use cases that you could use this for in your life. Um, like maybe you're studying for something, you're like, I want to help me build something to help me practice Python, or I'm always looking up these different cybersecurity laws and I need to put together like a workflow to like, if I say what's this new law, summarize it and give me like these references to stuff I've already talked about. You can build like these little workflows like this, and you didn't even have to code before. Vibe coding, you would have had to like maybe put together a whole lambda and you might have to write some code to do this, but now this is all just a nice little workflow. So we'll talk more about the security side of this now. So the IAM policies that it's generating, this is just kind of to explain stuff we're going to talk about later. But basically, you can see an IAM policy looks like this. It's got a whole structure here. This is JSON, so JavaScript object, and it will have different things like an action, like list notebook instances, and whether I'm allowed to do that or not. And so the action here, SageMaker list notebook instances, I can do it on all. If I was trying to scope this down, I would actually not put this like little star here, which means all. I would say, which notebook instances can I do this on? So here you can actually like um, this one down here, this resource, I'm giving it access to a specific notebook. And this is just any type of object, right? Oops, go back here. So I'm going to scroll through this. This might not make sense to you right away, but the idea is like if you are unfamiliar with some of this stuff, you can use an AI to help you like explain some of these policies and get very granular and say, hey, I only want this one person to be able to read stuff, so I can do this, or I want like another agent to have access to this, and I can like replace with like a specific username, whatever I have, you know, different policies. It's giving me a bunch of different examples of different things that I could do. And now it's explaining, deny certain things, da da da. And then it's, giving us some security things here. Thing you have to be careful about with AI is that, it will respond with what you're looking for. It may just come up with all these like very verbose security requirements that may or may not be related to what you're actually looking for. So again, the more context you can provide, say like, actually, I'm just a startup and I only have 2 users versus I am, an enterprise environment with 1,000 users. That's a very different threat model and advice that it can give you. So these are some examples. But another thing to mention is that Party Rock is like a, I wouldn't call this like fit for public or fit for private data. In that sense, this is just kind of for experimenting with things. If you were actually using this for like your company and any like proprietary data, you would want to actually use Bedrock, which is what we're going to look at next, where you can actually have like a private workspace. But this is a really good example for like educating people about the types of things you can build with this, and you can like have some free apps. So hopefully that was fun and useful, and hopefully you guys go out there and play with Patty Rock, and you've already been vibe coding if you can do that. So next we are going to look at Bedrock. I've mentioned this. This is a kind of like a little step up in complexity. So we're going to do things that are slightly more involved. You kind of have to know how AWS works a little bit, but it's still not going to be very involved in terms of coding. This is all abstracting away that coding layer. Um, so Bedrock, I've mentioned before, it's basically AWS's managed AI service. So before, when people were trying to, train machine learning models and stuff, you'd have to set up like a Linux server, set up all these things. You'd have to like SSH in there and do things, whatever, allocate all this stuff. But Bedrock just exposes models to you where you can call them with an API. You can send in a prompt and say, I want this response, and just get the stuff back super quickly. You don't have to like manage the whole model and the connections yourself. And it's really good for benchmarking, so you can compare like different models for different scenarios. If you want to do like image generation with this one and text with this one, it's really good. Um, and then guardrails, I'm going to talk about as well for security. You can use different guardrails for adding different security and privacy controls. So, like if you're operating in Europe, you have to follow GDPR. So you could add more specific guardrails around, respecting users' privacy, or like not asking for certain questions for certain information, or different areas of the world where you don't want to talk about certain things. So um, those are all examples. So here's kind of an example of the AWS console, what Bedrock is here. So when you have an AWS account, you sign in and you get this dashboard with kind of an overwhelming number of options, but you can go search for Bedrock and it pulls it up here, and you can go to the playground menu here. And playground is just a way to compare different AI models. I think this one's super handy. If you aren't familiar with like all these models, there's so many and it's kind of impossible to try them all, and they all come out with new versions constantly. But I think it's really cool to kind of test them out. So this is just kind of a demo of like something you could do with Bedrock and try some different prompts, and you could add some things. So I can go into compare mode and I can choose like a different model here. Um, you know, this Claude Opus just came out. It's very popular. So this is kind of an example. Claude Opus is getting a lot of demand. A lot of people are using it. So it's actually going to be a little bit slower just because there's not as much capacity for it at the moment. Um, and you can change like parameters like the length, the temperature. I can add guardrails. I'll show you how to do that later. But this is kind of a quick example of like how you could play around with some different things. So again, I'm doing a little prompt related to security for vibe coding in cloud infrastructure. and then it will generate some responses, and you could measure like the response time here. It has like the number of milliseconds. Claude is taking a little longer because it's very popular right now. Um, and then we have like some, uh, you know, output there, things like that I'm going to talk about later in the talk. So it has some interesting advice. You can compare those there. And then, following up with some different things. We already talked about IAM policies. I'll cover some of this later, but Bedrock Playground is just an easy example of this. So if you have a developer set up, what you can do is you can set this up as an API. So instead of using the console and like typing things in the web, I can set this up so that I can just call Bedrock via API or like command line and send it these questions that way. So if you have like a chatbot, like a customer support chatbot, it could send it to Bedrock and get back these same responses. But you can use the playground here to figure out like what configurations would I want my customer chatbot to have, and see like how is the response happening. So that's an easy way to play around with it. And I think if you haven't used Bedrock before, this is like exactly the type of place that you want to try it out. You can see it's a little less fun and colorful than Party Rock, but it's kind of another easy version. But I mentioned guardrails. I want to talk about those next. So in terms of secure vibe coding, this is one of the best things you can do is to learn about guardrails, because if you are, if you're working at some kind of large company, let's say you are responsible for sort of like managing a bunch of developers that are, using vibe coding to build stuff, but you also want to make sure that they're not generating stuff they're not supposed to, or you are using this to like put guardrails on a customer facing thing. Maybe you have customer support chatbot. You do not want your customer support chat bot doing things that it's not supposed to do, right? So um, you can use this to put guardrails on the model that people are calling. And this is something that when people at Amazon do AI pen tests, we like create more guardrails and add to things to figure out like how can we better add controls to AI models. So here's why, like, prevent against generating malware, kind of classic one here. If you have a customer support chatbot, you do not want this to be generating malware, right? Or you don't want your developers on your team generating malware, probably, right? Unless we're security researchers, we do that, but um, you know, you don't want most companies aren't going to want that. So I can enable a bunch of different things here. I can, add prompt injection filtering. I can set the threshold to high, medium, or low, because maybe if people are talking about code, if your developers are using this, they probably want to be able to paste in code. But if you have customer support for like selling T-shirts, you don't need people pasting in code, so you can just block like code-related questions at all. I can add a denied topic here. I can add like malware. Um, you know, whatever I don't want it to talk about. And then I'm going to, malware, spyware, all these things. And I can even add sample phrases down here. So, make me some ransomware. I want to build some spyware. I don't want to allow any of these things, right? Confirm. And I'm going to go next. I could do profanity filter. And I could adjust that for certain languages, things like that. Um, and PII and regex is also good. So if you don't want people like pasting in their social security numbers, or you don't want people, executing certain commands, maybe you know that you have something like a production server and you don't want people vibe coding on your production server, you could, put some regex to block things related to that. So we're going to create that guardrail. And now you can see that it's here and it's ready. And now I can test it right away. So this is just an extension of the playground, basically. I'm going to apply the guardrail, and now I'm going to have my question. I want to make some malware here. And let's see if the guardrail works. Aha. So you can see this model cannot answer the question. I can actually view the trace, and I can see that it was blocked under misconduct and for the denied topics, and it intervened. So that's an example of guardrails working. So depending on your context, you of what type of company or what type of customer you have, you may or may not use these, but I think it's something really important to point out. So Now we're going to get into the actual vibe coding side of things. So far what I've showed you isn't exactly very technical. It's just kind of using like dashboards and stuff, but I wanted to show the fun, easy stuff first. And now we're going to actually get into the kind of more fun technical coding things. So uh, Kiro is Amazon's vibe coding IDE. So an IDE is an integrated development environment. It's basically a code editor. And Kiro is kind of based on VS Code. So if you like the VS Code setup, but you just want more AI features, Kiro is great for that. And it's also based a lot around spec-driven development. So that's the idea that you're using specifications to define what you want to build. So instead of, just typing in a prompt, Kiro actually works best if you use it to design stuff and write like design documents to say, these are the functional requirements. This is what, the customers have said they wanted. This is what my team already uses. Here's how I need to make it work. And then it can like put the pieces together. So just like a normal software engineering process, you would typically start with creating like design documents and that kind of thing. You would do the same, giving the AI all of that context. Um, so Kiro is cool because you can choose the model you want. It's not locked into just one model. So you can bring the model from any provider that you like. You can also add configurations and context docs. So you can add like a prompt file. In terms of security, it's really cool because you could add uh, like a custom prompt at the beginning talking about certain coding standards, like say, please follow the OWASP top 10 and make sure that you're checking for these types of things. Or we recently had an incident around this, make sure that, when we're coding with this in the future, we don't do this. Context documents for like your own internal infrastructure. And then every time you run, it will check and make sure those kinds of things happen. And then extensions, I'll talk about that later a little bit, but basically like plugins or skills, things that you want. People have built like whole knowledge bases and things like that that you can plug into Kiro. So I have a little demo here. This is Kiro. It has a cute little ghost as the mascot, so I was like that. But here, instead of just chat first, the vibe coding, I'm just going to do spec first. So I'm going to plan and then build. Um, so I want to build a simple project in AWS. Help me spec then build the startup. And I want to do, here's some ideas. So a Lambda is an AWS service that just helps you execute a little bit of code and do file uploads to an S3 bucket. S3 is another AWS service that's just like simple file storage. And then I wanted to send me an email when this happens. So this is just a super basic example of something that I could build. Um, and then I want to follow secure coding practices and least privilege. So always the best thing that you can do when you're trying to do secure vibe coding is start from your very first prompt with security instructions, because that lets the model know that that's important to you. The AI is always just trying to like please you and do what you want. So if you say do this as quickly as possible, don't waste time on unnecessary stuff, it might not think as much about security, versus if you stress in those very first sentences that you want it to focus on security, it's going to like slow down and take more time to do that. So I always try to tell people to focus on that and add security stuff from the beginning. So here it's including some steering documents, and it's like prompting me for some different things. It's going to, you know, start by going in and checking if I've already created some documents, and it started like making its own configuration. It listed out this requirements document. So it's listing out the things that I told it, but it's elaborating on it. So I only give it a few sentences, but here it is creating like a whole list of things that it thinks it should have. Um, and if I wanted to be more specific about this, I could actually go in and edit the document and be like, actually, I want there to be a delay of 1 day between when this thing is uploaded, when I send the email, something like that. Or I don't want to send emails within this time zone or timeline. And then it, gives me the documents. I'm like, okay, great. Now I actually want to build. So this is going to shift into the vibe coding side of it. Is now I want to actually code out the feature. And infrastructure as code is basically a way to write out the setup. So instead of like creating everything in the AWS console, like I can go click and I can say like spin up, an EC2, or I can like create an S3 bucket. I can use code and command line to make those objects. So whatever account I'm signed into, I could, push that up that way. Or I can just make this like a project that anyone could clone and start up in their own accounts. So it's just like a template. So that's what it's doing here is it's building out kind of the different um, files that would go there. So I have like this email builder .python that it's built. Um, this is like the little code that would run on the Lambda. So it's just small files that execute occasionally. And it's like building real code. So I can go in there. I know how to code in Python, and I can say, hey, actually, I want to edit this. I want to do that. But even if I didn't know how to code in Python, I could, ask it to leave me some very verbose comments and, understand what's going on there and edit it. Um, Obviously, I still advocate for knowing how to code. I think now that we have vibe coding, it's tempting to like not really learn to code, but you should always learn to read what you're writing because in terms of security, it's just super important to be able to understand, do that double check yourself that things make sense, because if you put that workload onto the AI, you're never going to learn. And so, I think definitely like help the AI write the easy stuff. Have the AI help you write the easy stuff, right? Like you don't want to have to like format, a user interface or something. But in terms of like more complicated stuff, anything related to security, I think it's still important to go in and learn how to write that stuff yourself so that you get that skill set. Because if you're here in WeSys, we all want to be developing our security skill set. So do take time to keep learning those things. It just will make it faster and easier for you, as opposed to having to like stumble around online and look up documentation. So here it is. It's created a bunch of files. This is awesome. It's still writing. You can see it kind of takes a while if it's like a very complex project. So there's different things that were optional. I could turn on or off. If I went back into the requirements, I could say like ignore these optional requirements and do this faster, or I could add more security requirements, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's adding a bunch of stuff. I'll skip through this a little bit. Do do do. All right. So it finishes here at the end. It's still saying like I can add a tenant through DynamoDB, and any file uploaded here, it's an example corporation, will trigger an email notification. So this is awesome. It just built a whole bunch of stuff. And again, as part of software development, I would need to write some tests. I would need to make sure that this works. I would need to, go through and actually make sure I understand the things that I'm writing. Um, but pretty cool that you can use an agent to like just write code for you, because this type of stuff would have taken like a person with manual effort could have taken them a really long time to write this all out, and we just did it here in a couple minutes. So um, that's pretty awesome. But yeah, in terms of security, I'm going to talk about more things later. But yeah, the best things that I've mentioned already are making sure that you're including security in your prompts from the beginning so the agent knows that's a priority for you, making sure you're adding those like context um, and like steering files that are related to security and context for your organization. So it knows if you have like an internal authentication framework and it knows how to use that. Um, and you can add in like skills and extensions to do code scanning, or like a popular open source code scanner is SemGrep. You could add that in um, and have it like scan your code and give you some things to see if it finds anything that you forgot, and fix that. So there's a lot of stuff out there. I give a whole workshop on specifically like setting up some of those more like code scanning tools, and that's included in the attachments here on BrightTalk. They've kindly added that here. So there's a GitHub repo if you want to go more in depth on that like specific setup. But I have some like talks about some information there and recordings about how to set up SemGrep as an MCP server. Basically, that every time as you're writing code, it would like add that layer of scanning. But here I'm staying more focused on AWS stuff. So, um, you know, if you have your own setups, you can do whatever you want to build there. So yeah, there's an example of Kiro developing a whole bunch of things, and I think it's really awesome. And especially because I added a requirement for the IAM policies and the multi-tenant stuff, um, it's added some interesting things here. It's making sure that I'm using encryption. It's making sure that I'm doing access logging with an audit bucket, which is really cool. So I could see like who's accessing this stuff. Um, let's see if it has the IAM policies in here somewhere. They are in there. But anyway, yeah, so now that you know also about how to look at IAM policies, you can make sure that you actually go check those and say like, hey, does this actually use the principle of least privilege, and make sure you're following all those things. So now I also wanted to talk about supply chain risks because, again, this is part of security in the cloud. So as a customer, you can put whatever stuff in there you want, right? AWS, we're not going to stop you if you want to put whatever you want in there, but because you have the freedom to build with your own stuff, you have to make sure that you are careful about the types of like plugins and things you're using. So if you find some random stuff online and you're like, oh, this looks cool, I want to throw this into my environment, make sure that you're checking for stuff because there is a popular thing now with malware developers like releasing extensions and stuff to third party marketplaces, different plugin skills, documents, data sets, that kind of stuff, saying like, oh, this is the new greatest thing. You should download it on your work computer. And then if you don't know what you're doing, you could have just unleash some malware out there. So especially because a lot of this AI stuff is moving super fast, everyone always wants to be the first to try something. So I would say don't be the first person to try something. Maybe be like a little bit behind the curve in some of these things. Let some people figure out if that's malware before you're the first to click on it. So um, a lot of these like extension marketplaces have cool stuff, but just make sure you're watching what's out there. Like here's an example. This was a blog that was put out by Sneak, where they found that there was a malicious um, VS Code extension out there that was masquerading as the Solidify extension. So Solidify is like a crypto thing. And this was supposed to be related to like letting people interact with that with an AI. But you can see here that this was the real one um, for Ethereum. But this one is a fake one that people did not realize was fake and actually had some malware. And just because the name is different, even though it uses the same logo, you wouldn't necessarily know which one to click on. So do just be careful when you're browsing these marketplaces because a lot of times anyone can upload stuff. Depending on what setup you have, if your company has allow listed stuff, I think that's one of the best things that you can do is like if you're managing a team of developers or a whole company where you're like responsible for locking stuff down, make sure you have like an allow listed set of approved extensions or plugins because if people are just pulling stuff off the web, you might not know where things are coming from. And of course, make sure you have defense in depth. Someone is probably going to install something silly at some point. So make sure you've got like, your host scanning and are able to quarantine someone's system if they did install something bad because a lot of people are trying out things now. And then kind of the last thing that I wanted to sort of talk about here is actual code hygiene itself and getting into checking your code. And again, I give a whole talk specifically focused more on like code patterns. And that's the link that I've included in the attachments. But I think it's really important to understand um, like still being able to read your code. And so again, if you haven't gotten into coding yet and you're just getting into vibe coding, make sure you spend some time developing that skill set and learning still how to read your code because that's super important in security. So your code comes from your prompts. As a vibe coder, the AI is just trying to live up to the things that you asked it to do, right? And they're getting better and better, like smarter and smarter, and people are building in, more security knowledge. But at the end of the day, if you ask your agent to do something insecure, it's going to just follow instructions, right? If you say, build me this website with HTTP instead of HTTPS, like I don't want to take the time to set up, um, you know, certificates or something, like it's going to do that, right? So you have to make sure you understand the secure infrastructure implications of like the things that you're asking it to do. Um, so definitely take some time to learn about secure coding principles, learn about architecture of the cloud, especially if you're using AWS. There's a ton of resources out there about secure architecture in the cloud. There's like best practices. So if you haven't done something before, you can like point your agent to those things and say, hey, this looks like what I should do when I'm setting up an S3 bucket is make sure it's not public, right? um, things like that. And hopefully you can use that knowledge to then just double check and think about like the things you should check when you're building, right? One thing I always want to point out to people as well, in terms of secure coding, are the OWASP guides. So OWASP is the Open Web Application Security Project. It's one of the most important organizations out there for developing like secure application security guidelines. They have the OWASP Top 10, which is very popular, and it's only 10 vulnerabilities, so it's not obviously covering everything. But if you haven't gotten into code security before, I think it's really important to just read these and understand what these are and reference them when you're talking to your agent, because it will kind of trigger that knowledge set of, oh yeah, I should go look at this and I should remember that OWASP exists, and you can pull in those resources. And the other thing that OWASP does beyond this like top 10 list of the most common ones is they have these really great secure coding cheat sheets. So depending on whatever language or framework you're using, say you're using Node.js and you haven't really used it before, it's a new framework, you're like, hey, I want to go figure out how to actually, parse a URL securely. There's no way you're going to like memorize every single one of these like different, parameters, right? But if I can go feed this cheat sheet to my agent and say, hey, I think I need to do something with URL parsing. I think this looks like the secure stuff. It will give it like a much better chance of being able to follow that. So the better references you can give it, the better products you're going to get. And you as a human, the more you study this, the more you can like have that reaction and muscle memory to check your code and look for stuff. And I wanted to kind of finish here with a few fun examples of kind of silly things that we've seen in the world. So I do kind of my own research on secure vibe coding, and things that I've come across and people have, posted here in the world are kind of funny. So here's an example. It said vibe code so hard your entire waitlist is visible in front end. This was one example that went viral because they found this kind of really nice looking vibe coded website, but a lot of people don't know, if you haven't coded before, you don't know that HTML and JavaScript can be just visible in the front end, right? So if you just right click on any site and you go to inspect, you can go to developer tools, you can read, um, you know, the code that's there, you can read the responses that come back. And this person had their waitlist. So all the people's email addresses that had signed up to try their app were there. And I blocked this out here, but um, yeah, that's kind of something that if you weren't thinking about it, if you told your agent, like, I just want to build this as something for my own computer, like this is just a demo and it's going to stay here, it'll be like, okay, fine, I don't need to sanitize stuff or whatever. But if you tell that like this is going to be real production, like this is going to be out there and a lot of people are going to see this, that's a completely different context and it will help you like threat model around that. So make sure you're talking about like when you're building something, is this going to be public for the whole world to see and hackers are going to have to look at it and people's private information might be involved? Or is this just something where I'm just messing around on my computer and I just want to see how this works and maybe I don't need to add all these layers. So um, that's kind of an interesting one there. And then probably a lot of people heard about Moltbook and the whole OpenClaw situation a few months ago. But this was really interesting because this was sort of an example of don't be the first to try something. There was a whole situation where um, OpenClaw was this, agentic framework that was released, and someone said, "Hey, wouldn't it be cool if all these agents had their own social media where they could talk to each other, like Reddit?" And they just vibe coded this thing, and they did not expect it to go viral. So all these people were letting their agents post on it, but it turned out that they didn't take the time to actually put any database security protections in place. And this like whiz blog here, they found that they were able to go in and there was a ton of API keys that they were able to access from the database. They were able to post as other people and agents. Um, there was some kind of funny stuff where people were thinking that the agents were like making their own religion and talking to each other, but it turned out to be a lot of people impersonating agents through like stealing API keys from the database, things like that. So if you want to get more in depth on kind of what this looks like in a real incident, you can go read this blog. And it had a really good kind of breakdown of what happened. But just examples of just because you can doesn't mean you should. If you just want to throw something out on the world and you haven't actually taken the time to develop um, like real security guardrails and like spending time on those aspects, like agents are just gonna, create what you ask it to. So um, make sure that, you think about how many people are going to see this. Is this going to be, under scrutiny, that type of thing, versus just a little demo for you to play around with. So kind of my top tips for everybody here are to make sure that you learn about secure credential storage, clean up dead code, and secure your supply chain. So some of the best things that you can do when you're vibe coding is be really careful with your credentials. It's tempting when you're just vibing something where you're like, hey, I need this API key to work. Especially a lot of agentic things, you need like an API key to make the agent call back and make something work or refresh. But please do not put that in the code, because when you push that out to GitHub or you publish that somewhere, people can steal your API key and then start like racking up your AI bill. Um, so you want to use something like a secrets manager. AWS has AWS Secrets Manager, or you can use environmental variables, so it's just on your system and then it accesses that way. Um, there's a bunch of different ways to do this. If you have like a CI/CD pipeline, you can like have the secrets injected there. But do not just hard code them into the code. Make sure you look up how to do that if it sounds like something you're working on. Um, Dead code also is important, because if you're vibing something and you change your mind, you're like, actually, you were like, I was building a t-shirt website, but now I want to build like a healthcare website. And now I need to accept a bunch of sensitive data or something. If you're suddenly changed directions and you had left behind all this code that is still there, that's a new attack surface, something you might not have thought about. Like if you had just like a silly thing where people could go browse, your database of t-shirts, but then you replace that with a database of healthcare information, and that's still public, like that's a problem, right? So you need to make sure that you clean up stuff or just scrap things if you're changing directions and you're adding like different functionality, because um, that's kind of like a big thing. If you didn't write your code, you don't actually know what's there. Especially sometimes when people run out of tokens, they'll kind of leave a project and come back to it like a day or a week later when their tokens refresh. They might have forgotten where they were, and you'll leave like these chunks of projects behind that can increase your attack surface. And then kind of the last thing here is supply chain. That one of the biggest things with this whole vibe coding thing is there's so many different pieces and little bits that are getting all plugged in together. Everyone's trying new stuff. It's really exciting. You'll be downloading different data sets and you like files and dependencies, um, just cool things that say, oh, this is this magic tool. It'll fix all your problems. Some of these can contain malware, like I mentioned before. Make sure that you're careful about all the stuff that you're throwing into your agent. Like if you tell it to do something insecure, it might, because depending on what you've added for context. So the more that you can, keep your environment clean, make sure that you're focusing on security and that kind of stuff, you're going to, um, be able to build things more securely. So I'll just wrap up here. Secure coding mindset. Hopefully, you've gotten a lot of ideas so far of different things you can try and research. Um, but yeah, I think one of the best things you can do is just educate yourself, keep learning. It's really tempting with vibe coding to just kind of offload your thinking to the AI, but if it doesn't have the context that you have, there's only so much it can do to build something with like the right parameters for the right audience, for the right level of security or privacy. So make sure you specify as much as you can, like this is just a demo for me, or this is something that is going to have to go under scrutiny for different security and privacy laws, right? um, and make sure you like mention security from the beginning in those prompts. Make sure that you're building your infrastructure securely. We talked about those IAM policies. Make sure you're not just making everything open to everyone. um, Make sure your agents have scoped down roles, that it doesn't need access to production sometimes. Maybe you just need stuff in development. Watch out for those rogue plugins, and then know when to get help. I think it's always important to have mentors and people that you can go to for help. Just because you can vibe something doesn't mean you should. Go get help when you are curious about security and you're kind of scaling up to something that may or may not have, more repercussions if something were to go wrong. Know when to get help for those edge cases. Um, so yeah, I hope that is inspiring to you, and I hope that you're going to go build something. So you can go on Amazon's website for AI learning, and learn about a bunch of different things that I mentioned. So Bedrock Guardrails, Party Rock, and Kiro. And there's a million other AI things that you can try out there as well. So I hope that you'll continue learning, and I have some time for questions if anybody has questions. Let's see, I'll open the question tab here. All right. Please share any references and books about the topic. I'm starting on research. That's awesome. Yeah, if you go click the attachments tab here in BrightTalk, I have included a link to like a GitHub repo where I have some more information. I have a bunch of links to different papers that you could read, different tutorials and stuff that I've done in kind of a more like I usually do like a 2-hour workshop where I work more specifically on code security. So if you want to dive into the coding aspect there, you can go take a look at that. Um, how common will vibe coding be in the IT industry? Do you predict a shift in job availabilities? I think, yeah, it's coming. It's already here. A lot of companies are, encouraging vibe coding, but it really depends on their field, right? So, um, something like the government that's working with more like secure things, or like if you're in healthcare or like critical infrastructure, there's generally, things move a little slower. They have to be a little more careful about adopting things. And so I think in certain areas, it's going to be maybe like 5 to 10 years before things are like really leaning into vibe coding. But a lot of big tech is already really pushing for it. But again, it's not just type stuff into an AI. You still have to know about the things that you're building and how to drive stuff and build things securely, be productive. Um, so you still keep learning all the things you need to learn. You're just going to be able to do it faster and better with AI. Um, what's a good tip to check if the plugins are legit? I'm actually not sure of any good resource out there right now. I'm sure someone's going to build like a good plugin checker, but you can go to there's some like block lists out there available online where you can like paste in a URL and it will like check if anyone's reported if it's malware. There's also like Virus Total. Um, which is something where you can upload like a file and it will scan it for malware, that kind of stuff, or any kind of like host-based malware scanning. Or just generally go look for like the website of the thing that you know you're looking for. Like if it was Olama, I'd go to the actual Olama website versus like a random thing on GitHub that says it's Olama, if that makes sense. And then have you found that Kiro, the AI, generates repetitive or complex code? How do I prompt it to follow design principles? I think so far it codes very well. It's more just like, did I give it confusing instructions or something, or I didn't tell it exactly what I wanted. So part of that is like, if I just said like, make me a website, it has no idea what kind of website I want. What do I want it to look like? What do I want it to be built with? So the more that I can provide it with specific specifications of what I want it to be, then it will get closer and closer. But you can keep iterating on it. So you can start with something simple and get an idea and then just keep adding more and more specific requirements to get closer to what you want. All right, next one. How effective are the block filters? Like I think you're talking about bedrock guardrails. I mean, that's part of like what we do in pen testing is that we try to get around stuff and we try to make them better. So it's like a work in progress. Things are always getting better and better, but you know, in terms of security of the cloud, as AWS, when we put stuff out there, we're saying this is secure as we could do with the experts that we have that have tested this really thoroughly. Um, Obviously, things change, and so we keep updating. We keep adding more guardrails, and then you with your team can add your own custom guardrails. So if you know there's a specific case that you're thinking about that doesn't exist, you can add like more protections on top of that. And then could you recommend a specific book, blog, or some research as good reference to what guardrails to implement? There are some playbooks out there. So if you just look up AWS guardrails and go on like the AWS website, there's a whole bunch of resources and videos on kind of how those work and what things you might want to add. And if you go on YouTube too, you could kind of see examples of maybe what people have done for their different use cases. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of examples out there. Does Party Rock use tokens? Party Rock is like a free service, so it is limited. Like it has like limited use cases, and you can't create like an unlimited number of like projects and stuff like that. But as far as I know, it'll work for like most like demos that you want to do. If you do want um, like more capacity, you're gonna have to like probably pay for something through Bedrock, but it is very cheap for just like a single person like just prompting it. It's not going to be very expensive, depending on how many people you have and your budget for your company. That changes, but if you ran into the Party Rock limit, then I would suggest checking out Bedrock. As someone starting my tech journey, okay, what tools should I be looking oh, okay, we go back. Okay. As someone starting my tech journey when it comes to projects, should I do vibe coding or will employers reject it? That's a good question. I think you should do both. You should do both manual coding and vibe coding. And I think show that you know how to do both of those because it shows that you do know how to understand and write code, but also shows that you're with the times and you know that you may work for employers that encourage vibe coding. But you also might work for employers that don't uh, allow it for in the next few years. There's still some people that might not allow it. So please, you know, continue learning to code and all that stuff. Yeah. What about, it says, what kind of tools should I be looking for penetration testing? That is a whole thing. I can't give you that answer in just a couple of minutes, but I have a website. If you look me up, Beta Lion Del Sordo, it's a link to my LinkedIn as well. And I have an FAQ page where I have linked a bunch of um, tools and places to learn things uh, that I recommend for people starting out. And the thing I'll say is that when you're starting learning penetration testing, your first couple of years, you don't need to pay for any training. There's so much amazing free content out there. So um, just all the things you need available are probably stuff you could look up on YouTube to start out. What are the pet passion projects you're working on at the moment with vibe coding? Ooh, I'm doing just like a lot of research on, secure vibe coding and how we can use AI to help us find security issues in code. And like going back to like old code that was written a long time ago by people and seeing if like can AI help us find new things in old code. And it's been really interesting to like use AI to do stuff that's like less readable. So like things that are like lower level languages like C or like machine code that would take a human a really long time to read. AI can help you like read those a lot faster. So that's super interesting. Um, Modifying the prompt. It says something about letting developers opt out of secure code. I mean, I think that's for those of us that do like malware research and like I do sometimes like I have to write like exploits for penetration testing. We do have like certain systems where we've set up to like remove some guardrails because we need to be able to generate malware. Um, and there are like different models out there that have like those. So you can research kind of what people use if they're doing kind of like exploit development. But for like most people, they don't actually want it to generate malicious stuff. So we typically want those guardrails for like most people that aren't doing security research. Um, Someone says, I feel overwhelmed. There's so much to know and learn. That's okay. Don't worry. I would say pick something that excites you. Don't start with the thing that you're dreading. Start with the thing that's exciting to you. And if that was, Party Rock looked fun, just go play around with it, and it will trigger something that you might find interesting, and then keep, working towards things that are a little more confusing. But just kind of follow your intuition and what excites you, and that's where you'll learn the most. And then the last question here: how do you keep up with supply chain stuff? Um, they get updated from like LinkedIn post. There are some really good threat intel feeds out there. So CISA in the US is the Security Infrastructure Security Agency, has like a whole threat intel feed where they will put out like advisories for certain things like major security supply chain risks you should be aware of. But you can subscribe to different like newsletters for people that do security research, that kind of thing. But that's the thing with threat intel is that it's always it's always changing and you can't always keep up with all the changes. And then I think we'll just do one more here. Is the crossing over from blue team to red team fairly easy? I don't really know because I've always been red team. So we'll see. But yeah, I've always been on the offensive side of things mostly. But yeah, welcome to AWS if you're coming. So thanks everybody for joining today. I love the questions and enthusiasm, and definitely please reach out to me on LinkedIn. If you have questions later. And I love seeing that people engage with demos or tried something out. And what did you find? What did you learn? Do you have any suggestions? So yeah, just let me know. So thanks everybody for coming.